let's talk about the systemd age field stuff, because there's been a lot of discussion about where we go a year, 3 years, 5 years from now, but very little discussion about specifically what this PR is adding. And because of that, frankly, I don't think a lot of the discussion is very useful about what the change actually is. So, this is the PR in question in systemd, userdb, add birthdate field to JSON user records. And the commit message saying, add a birthdate field to the JSON user record stored internally as a struct in this format here. The field is serialized as a year, month, date string in JSON and validated via parse birthdate. Validated as a real date, not verifying that it is your actual birth date. So if you enter something like, I hate Lennart Pottering, that is not a date. Also, unlike you're seeing in some of the builds, this is not an age group, so saying you're below this age, between this age, above this age, this is an actual date. Most of this video is going to be me talking about what is actually changing here and the opinions of some of the developers. If you want my actual opinions, jump ahead to the last, couple minutes of the video. This stores the user's birth date for age verification as required by recent laws in California AB 1043, Colorado SB 26-051, and Brazil Lei 15.211/2025, and all the rest of them. Most US states have either something being drafted or something that is very likely going to already be on the books. Countries like Australia have laws, the UK, Canada, I know, doesn't yet, but they are definitely thinking about it, and there is a bunch of other places all drafting up very similar laws. I know some people are kind of behind the news on where things actually are. This isn't just California and Colorado anymore. This is a lot of other places. The XDG Desktop Portal project is adding an age verification portal in this PR here. I might do a separate video on this, but I want to focus mainly on the systemd change. I'll leave this link down below if you want to check it out, though. That needs a data source for the user's age. UserDB already stores personal metadata, email address, real name, location, so birthdate is a natural fit. There is a very high probability that you had absolutely no idea that systemd was storing this information about you. And this is not a new addition. This has been here pretty much the entire time there's been a user record component of systemd. If you'd like to check that information on your own system, what you can do is userdbctl, user, and the name of your user. And you're going to notice something. It's very likely that that's not actually storing that information, okay? We can actually do it with sudo, and that is going to provide you some more information. You have the real name, email address, location, and a bunch of other information, and at least on my system, they are completely empty. So these fields are entirely optional to enter. If you're on something like Arch Linux, when you set up your user account, you probably didn't enter any of that information. So on my system, none of that is entered. If you're on something that has a GUI installer and asks for things like your real name, maybe your location, things like that, it is very likely that information is being stored in these fields. So specifically, what is being added with this pull request is like there is a real name, like there's an email address, like there's a location, and all of these other things, an additional field is being added for your birth date. This is something I just don't feel comfortable entering, and I wouldn't enter on one of my own systems. But if you're in something like a corporate network, a university, things like that, that is a situation where you probably are already providing them that information anyway, and then that would be a way to store that within the systemd userdb. One common thing I've been seeing is, why is there even this information being stored in systemd in the first place? I thought systemd was an init system. There's no reason for that to be in an init. And you'd be correct, but systemd also isn't an init system. One of the components of systemd is an init system, but systemd is a suite of tools, and one of those tools is userdb, the database of users, and that is where the information is being stored. Now, do I think there should be one suite that does everything on your system? That's a whole nother discussion, and it's pretty easy to argue that maybe the systemd suite is a little bit too big. But that's the way it is. Another thing people have been talking about is this Dylan M. Taylor who actually made the pull request. To my understanding, they were not actually an active developer in systemd before this pull request was made, and you might know that they've also been going around and creating very similar other pull requests in projects like Arch Install and a bunch of others as well. Now, I do think it's certainly interesting that one person is going around and making these pull requests on various different projects. And if somebody wants to dig into who this person is and what they're involved in, hey, be my guest. I am not going to stop you. At the same time, I don't personally think it is that interesting when you have developers who actually are active developers, like Lennart Potter, for example, who are still in support of these changes being made. So whilst the origin, you might argue, is a little bit weird, at the end of the day, it was probably going to be made by a systemd developer somewhere along the line anyway. As long as the code is good, frankly, I don't really care who started it. However, like with Meta probably being behind these laws, if somebody wants to go and do some digging and work out if anyone is paying this guy and why he's the one going around and doing this, and wants to do some documentation on this and all this good stuff, feel free to send it my way. So, this PR was submitted about 2 weeks ago on the 5th of March, Australian time. Since then, most of the discussion, obviously people found this at some point and started downvoting it. This has since been locked because a bunch of people started jumping in the thread. Most of the discussion in here is pretty much just about the quality of the code, the formatting of the code, things like that. Really boring back-end stuff that, frankly, not worth talking about. Somewhere along the way, an additional pull request was opened to change it from just being a birth date to also an age group, which in some of the bills is the only requirement. The strongest argument against doing so was this here. The biggest practical problem with age group is it needs to be regularly updated, as users age, but also as the laws change. This applies even to adults. What if there are multiple overlapping categories? What if in one case you need age, but another you need group, and then if your group changes, so you go from being, let's say, 15 to 16, let's say this is another group, or let's say 17 to 18, now you're in the adult group, you've then got to bug the user constantly, like, hey, did your group change? Did your group change? Did your group change? And that's really annoying, right? That is a really annoying UX. Is there a better way to do it? Probably, but at least with that argument, I do see what is being said there. Regardless of why it wasn't done, this was closed as not planned, so the change that was added was your birth date, not your age group. From what I can see, the first person outside of systemd who found this pull request was Jeremy Stoller from System76. Now, back during my first age verification and attestation video, I did include his comment about the whole situation, not just about this, but everything going on that were over on Reddit. So, let's check it out. We are in talks, we as in System76, are in talks with legislators, and there are very likely to be amendments to the age verification bills, as well as conflicting requirements in different jurisdictions. It may even be the case that open source operating systems are exempted entirely. I detailed this on the XDG mailing list over here. This is talking about what Carl Rochelle has been doing. So Carl Rochelle is the CEO of System76. And I've talked about this before, but I'll talk about it here again. Basically, he's actually going outside and he is talking to senators and he is trying to make a change. He is trying to get open source operating systems exempted from these bills. He talked to Matt Bull, the co-author of the bill in Colorado, and there is some possible interest in making that happen. It is not guaranteed, it is not certain to happen, but there is at least some willingness to listen to the arguments. More recently than this, he had further talks with Colorado politicians, and again, there are concerns, there is a possibility, at the very least, they are willing to come to the table and discuss why people have issues with this. Is this going to change anything? Right now, unclear. Also, this is just in Colorado. It doesn't include states like California and all of the other states that all have very, very similar laws. Back to Jeremy. I have other concerns about this specific implementation. By relying on systemd, which is decidedly unportable to non-Linux operating systems, so your BSDs and things like that, and not used across all Linux operating systems either. There are distros that specifically use things like OpenRC and sysv and various other things. It will force at least one alternative implementation to exist. If these implementations end up having to collect jurisdiction-specific requirements, that makes it much harder for compliance. Following this change being added, there are already some OpenRC distros which are protesting and basically saying, we are never going to implement this. It is worth noting, however, that none of the enforcement of these bills are yet being done. So when enforcement actually comes in, we will see how many of those distros are still willing to put up a fight. Going to our Polish systemd contributor, I know he is Polish, firstly because he is in Warsaw, secondly, need I explain? It is possible that California law will be changed, but similar ideas are popping up in other contexts, and it's unlikely that they'll go away. This implementation is fairly generic and useful for other things besides age verification. As I said, you're in a corporate network, university network, things like that, so we shouldn't decide whether to merge it or not based on a single law in any jurisdiction. The API is generic, so anybody can try to re-implement it later if they want to avoid this implementation. But for 99% of systems out there, putting it in systemd is very reasonable. Jeremy goes on further to say, the California and Colorado law do not require storing a date of birth, which is indirectly identifying private information in the US, and age could be stored instead. So instead of the actual date, your age, so you are 27, you are 53, so on and so forth. Yes, this means the age bracket could be underestimated, and may then need to be manually updated to unlock things, but it would significantly reduce the ability to determine an exact person from data stored on the file system. The point I want to illustrate is that an operating system using systemd and provided in one of these jurisdictions may want to store an alternative form of data to comply, with a minimum potentially being the age bracket itself. The piece of data stored may end up being jurisdiction dependent, with some jurisdictions explicitly forbidding the storage of an exact birth date, while others explicitly require it. This is another thing. So some jurisdictions are saying, we want an age group. Some are saying, we want a age. We want a birth date. And some of the ones that are saying, we want an age group, are saying, you're not allowed to store the birth date. So this creates a situation where, to comply with other laws, you are breaking different laws. I don't disagree that the UserDB varlink API could be implemented on other open source operating systems, and that systemd covers a wide set of them. Now let's go to Mr. Lennart Pottering, which honestly is probably a good 95% of why people are angry about this. Also, it is worth noting that they do use Claude for code review. I know some people are angry about this as well. Also, separate topic, we're not talking about that here. Maybe I'll bring it up somewhere else. Here is why he thinks adding it is fine. I actually believe that making sure apps cannot read just the birthday field is a good idea, but it's just one tiny piece of data among so much more important stuff. If people run apps unsandboxed, these apps get access to any file in your home directory and a ton load more stuff on your system, and that data is a lot more valuable than the birthday is. Hence, let's not waste discussion around isolating apps from the single piece of information that is the birthday, while leaving everything else wide open. Basically, what he is saying is, if an app is not being sandboxed, it can access anything on your system, and by accessing anything on your system, it can uniquely identify you as a user. The birth date doesn't actually change that. The answer to PII issues, personally identifying information, is hence not restrictions in UserDB. The answer is proper app sandboxing, and that even already exists in Flatpak. It restricts access to home already and to UserDB too, and that's the way to do it. Hence, just embrace app sandboxing, and if you come to me and say, hey, I run all my apps without sandboxing, but I want the birthday hidden anyway, then I can only say your model is really, really broken. Fix your security model first, then come back. So I think UserDB should reveal the birthday to per user code, because that per user code then can consume this and provide a portal or something to properly sandbox apps that provides a more restrictive API, i.e. age bracket and so on. But that kind of stuff is outside of the scope of systemd. Here in systemd, we just provide you with a way to maintain the original data. The precise enforcement policy on it must happen in the sandbox. So we are providing the means to store the information. We are not doing anything with the information. That is up to the distros, the applications, and anything else that might be consuming that data. To further add to that, in a pull request trying to revert this change very shortly after it was submitted, he further says this right here. It's an optional field in the UserDB JSON object. It's not a policy engine, not an API for apps. We just define the field so that it is standardized if people want to store the data there, but it's entirely optional. Hence, please move your discussion elsewhere. You are misunderstanding what systemd does here. It enforces zero policy. It leaves that up for other parts of the system, like the distro, like the apps, so on and so forth. And sorry, I am really not interested in these discussions here. It's not the right place for this, and please don't bring it here. Thank you. Now, specifically noting that, here, he is not saying he is not open to discussions, but he's saying the GitHub itself is not the place for those discussions. As it stands with the current pull request, and things may change in the future, but what was actually merged into systemd, it adds a birth date field, and you can set that field to anything you want. That field can be January 1st, 1970, it can be nothing, it can be your actual birth date. Systemd is just providing the way to store the information. That is what it is specifically doing. Will that change in the future? It's entirely possible. But for what was specifically added now, that is what is in the codebase. On that note, do I think this should have been added? Firstly, I do not support these laws. Full stop, okay? I know people are just going to tune everything out if I don't start with this point. They're going to tune it out anyway because that's how the internet works, but I do not support these laws. However, they do exist, and there are countries where they don't currently exist that are pushing for these laws to exist. Putting your head in the sand and pretending like they don't exist, that's not going to make them go away, okay? No amount of doing that is going to make the laws go away. Systemd is the default suite on Linux nowadays, and whilst not having full coverage, it's the majority of users. There is also the BSDs, but the majority of people on Unix at this point are using Linux. So, if this does not happen at the OS level, that's not going to stop this from happening, okay? I want to make that clear. If you want to talk about where we're going in a couple of years, this will be at the hardware level if something is not implemented at the OS level. And at the OS level, you have the power to fork it, you have the power to modify the code, you have the power to completely remove the component. If you are running right now a system that is running systemd, you can just remove systemd. Or you can install a distro that doesn't have systemd. When it's in the operating system, you are still in control of it. If it's done at the hardware level, that change is suddenly vastly harder. And like companies such as Microsoft, which are more than happy to implement this in their operating system, the hardware manufacturers are going to be more than happy to comply. And whilst you were complaining about systemd, now you're in a way worse situation where you can't do anything about it. Now, to that you might say, well, I could just use older hardware. And that's great. You can absolutely use older hardware. What about your non-techie friends? What about your parents? What about your siblings? What about all of the normies who just consume, who buy a new computer and don't really think about it? With that being said, however, okay, I know some people have already tuned out already and already leaving the angry comments. I do agree with Jeremy that any merger should wait until we actually know where these laws are going. What is actually going to happen? Is open source going to be exempt? Is that just going to happen in Colorado? Is it going to be California as well? Is it going to be a US-wide thing? Is it going to be a worldwide thing? Are we going to see lawsuits happen that take this up to the US Supreme Court? As it currently stands, none of this is set in stone. So I agree with Jeremy that any sort of change that is going to happen here should not be done until we know what actually needs to be done. On that note, yesterday was the time, but today is as good as you're going to get. Now is the time to actually go and try to make a change in the world. Developers are not the ones that you should be wasting your energy on. If you actually care about these laws, and I know some people just like being angry on the internet because it's fun to be angry on the internet. But if you actually care about this problem and not just care because you like fighting on social media, go outside. Talk to your local politicians. Call them on the phone. You could even send them an email if you just want to do the easiest thing. But actually go and talk to your politicians and explain what is happening, why you're against these laws, why you think the laws shouldn't happen or open source should be exempt, or whatever concern that you have, go and talk to your politicians. That includes people who are in countries that don't yet have these laws. For example, Canada and various other places. One person is already making some level of change in one state. That's one person. You can be that one person in your state, in your country, and actually change this. Because you might say, oh, they don't care, they're not going to listen. Here's one example where at least they are willing to hear you out. Whether it's going to change anything, we don't know yet. But at least coming to the table. And especially making a pull request like this, where you're threatening to kill people, this isn't going to change anything. This is not productive, is not going to change anything. You are wasting your energy on stupid things that won't do anything. Additionally, I will say, if you're modding a discussion forum, not GitHub, GitHub's not a discussion forum, it's a place to do development work, but if you're modding something like a Reddit or like actual real forums, things like that, don't go around deleting threads about this. Unless you have like a mega thread where you want to keep everything contained, there is no reason to be stopping discussion about this because there is a lot to discuss and that is the place to discuss it. With that being said, if you'd like to discuss it, feel free to do so in my comment section. Now, I'm sure somewhere along the way, I lost somebody and they're really angry thinking I support these laws and I think that all of this should be done and this should be added into System D. Watch the video. Just watch the video, please. Please just watch the video and actually know what is being said. Anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. Like the video if you want to like the video. Subscribe, all that good stuff. And, yeah, if this seemed kind of rushed, it was because I wanted to talk about this as quickly as possible, but hopefully everything I said came across clear. Again, there's going to be people angry in the comment section who didn't think it was clear, so, let me know. Anyway, if you like the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well. If you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Daily Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and welcome to the future.